So, hello everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you all for taking some time out from your busy schedule and just being a part of this webinar, where we'll basically be talking about this amazing product called Google Anthos and be talking about a use case on how you can actually migrate to Anthos. So my name is Sumar, and I work as a global practice head at Royal Cyber, and with me is Hunan Thiba, and he works as a cloud engineering manager at the GCP practice at Royal Cyber. So this is the agenda that we're actually going to go help you guys out with. So basically, we're going to start off with a bit of an overview of the company. Then we're going to talk about Google Anthos, what are its capabilities, the features. Then we're going to talk about some important aspects of application modernization. What are the challenges? And eventually, we're going to walk you through a demo about migrating to Anthos, talk about their workflow, and then finally, going to end the session with a Q&A. So about a bit about Royal Cyber, we are a company. We are basically an IT consulting and a digital transformation company with an experience of more than 20 years. We have a physical footprint in about 9 countries, spanning over 5 continents. We have an employee strength of around 1,200, and we have worked with one of the best Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, spanning into different industries. Some of our clientele that we're really proud of to showcase are listed here, and these are all our different business partners, Google Cloud being one of them, who really help us to bring out the best services that we possibly can for our different customers over the span of 20 years. So before I actually talk about your Google Anthos, I just wanted to take you all into this small journey where if you just go back a few years, we used to have this trend of monolithic architectures where everything used to be jumbled up into this one huge application where all of the layers were like tightly coupled to each other. The business logic layer, the data access layer, the user interface layer, and the database itself, everything was just mushed into this one huge application that we quote unquote now say monolithic architectures. And this was way back like 10, 12 years ago. And I think at that time, it basically was able to serve the purpose. But as as people started, as technology started to progress and people started to gain access to more and more technology, and it started becoming much more household, and then different waves broke out into technology, so was the need of the of the innovation. So was the innovation was required in terms of designing and architecting our structures. So we slowly and gradually moved from monolithic architectures to this microservices trend, where all of these different layers were actually broken down into independent microservices, and all of those services were like entities that were like independent with their own databases, with their own different layers, and they would just talk to each other and then communicate with each other. And that is where slowly and gradually the industry started to move in terms of building their application and trying to serve their customers. This eventually led up to a concept called containers, where different frameworks were spawned on, starting from one of the most famous one was Docker, where you can actually, with the help of this one framework, you were able to, create different containers, and all of those microservices were shipped inside that one container. That one container was a very minimalistic, you would say, minimalistic approach to running your application, where a barebone OS would actually be entertained inside the containers enough to run that particular service, and all of those different containers were able to communicate with each other and then can be presented as independent entities. This eventually spawned to another framework called Kubernetes, which got a lot of popularity back in around 5-6 years ago, where a lot of developers and a lot of companies started using Kubernetes as the go-to container management system, where it was a lot easier to create containers and then manage those. To manage those containers, again, it worked in synonymously with Docker to sort of like have that orchestration on the container level for all of the applications. Google, on the other hand, definitely leveraged out Kubernetes and created their own service called Google Kubernetes Engine, and basically what this service was able to do is utilize the power of Kubernetes, and along with the help of Docker, they were able to create this amazing service where, and again, it's one of the most popular services on the platform, where it was able to run all of these different containers and orchestrate these containers, but by using a managed service where you can, a lot of things were just like on the click of a button, and you would be able to, manage and maintain your containers, and then eventually be able to ship them out for your software product. Now, in all of this essence, we then moved towards another service which was called Google Anthos. Now, Anthos is ironically a PaaS service provided by Google, but it's more of it works more on the software level, where it is independent of the infrastructure, underlying infrastructure that it actually accustomed to. This helps different vendors this helps companies to avoid vendor locking, and it can run anywhere in any cloud, whether apart from Google, or even it has the capability to even run on-prem. Google Anthos was, Anthos is seamlessly, can run with all of the different platforms, whether it's Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, VMware, even bare metal servers, or even custom clusters. One of the best thing about Google Anthos was that since it doesn't support vendor locking, it's very easy to deploy and manage it, and it can run anywhere and can provide you a centralized management system. One of the best part about having a centralized management system was that through this you were able to monitor all of your different workloads, whether those workloads are on another cloud, or if those workloads are on prem. You were able to basically manage all of those clusters and workloads to a single dashboard provided on the Anthos front, and we're able to manage all of those centralized applications and workloads in one place. So moving on with this, we can talk about the application, the importance of the application modernization. Now, here what you see on your screen is here what you see on my screen is like two different approaches. Where one approach is like you're having these bare metal virtual machines which are managed by an hypervisor, and this hypervisor, basically what it does is it basically uses a guest operating system, and that guest operating system was able to run those applications. So in short, what you're doing is you have one virtual machine which would have a guest operating system pre-installed into it. That guest operating system could be Windows, could be Linux, could be any other flavor, could even be Mac. So basically that operating system on its own was utilizing a lot of space, a lot of compute, and your application would actually be running on top of these guest operating systems. So your hypervisor would also be consuming some amount of CPU and memory utilization, but at the same time your guest operating system are doing the same thing. Now, if you look at the screen on the right, now this is where this the containerized application approach was manifested. Here, what you're doing is you're just having one host operating system, and that host operating system is actually is only managing one layer of Docker, and that Docker manifestation is actually managing all of your different applications enclosed inside a container. Now, what that does is it removes your dependency over guest operating system, where each individual application was utilizing it in the prior diagram. But in this approach, you do not need a guest operating system. You just need the bare minimum dependencies that are required for you to run that particular application. For example, let's say you wanted to run a Node.js application on let's say on one of the containers. Now, that Node.js application doesn't require you to install a complete operating system on top of it, like let's say Ubuntu. All you need is a runtime environment to actually run that Node application. And what Docker was able to do is provide you the bare minimum bare minimum environment of Node.js to help you execute that application into environment of Node to execute that application of Node.js into that particular container. What that also helped companies and developers to do is now you're not particularly locked up to one specific technology. you can have app A in Node.js, and you can have app B on .NET. You can have app C on Python. So you have all of those. You have liberty over all of the different technologies depending on what sort of use case you want to address. So for suppose, let's say your application is more leaned towards, let's say, generating PDFs and reports. So you feel that, hey, I think Node.js might not cut it. You want to use Python there, so you just spin up one service which would which basically would basically be running Python, right? And same goes for other technologies and applications as well. Okay, so basically, all of these. So Anthos not only does help you to simulate or run your run your workloads onto like other clouds, but also helps you modernize the approach as well, so that it consumes less space, it gives you highest number of ROIs, and you seamlessly right at the moment while you're trying to migrate from one cloud to other or from on-prem to the cloud, you're also seamlessly able to integrate your application while you're doing that. So these are like two parallel processes that are running incoherent with each other, which on the other hand is a lot harder when if you're trying to achieve both of those things through a single activity. So because so Anthos basically, since Anthos is a Google product, it works seamlessly with all of the other different Google products that are aligned here. So there are basically four different aspects of sorry, not three, four different aspects of running one Anthos container. So you basically analyze, you build, you run, and then you operate. So for analyzing, you can use different products different services that Google Cloud offers, like Code, like Migrate for Anthos. For build, you can utilize Google Cloud Build. For packaging, you can utilize Artifact Registry, and to run your applications, you can either use GKE, Apigee, Cloud Run, any other applications are like Cloud Functions. And then eventually, in order for you to operate and maintain those aspects of the application, you can actually look into cloud monitoring and basically cloud logging. So all of these different services, they seamlessly integrate with the Anthos environment, and then the Anthos environment will basically be able to utilize all of these different services to help you provide seamlessly different aspect of the services. So moving on. So in order for so basically, one of the best aspects about Anthos is that it is able to ship your workloads from one aspect of the cloud to the other aspect of the cloud. So what I mean by this is you are able to run all of your different workloads from on-prem to the cloud. So you're basically doing two different activities together. You're migrating to the cloud. You're also seamlessly integrating with the cloud as well at the same time. This is one of the core challenges that a lot of companies are facing, and this is one of the expertise that we have actually provided for different companies to utilize these services, so that they can not only be able to ship the product, but also not only be able to migrate, but at the same time ship the product as well. So in short, the Google Anthos is a product that that is separated from the layer of the infrastructure to avoid vendor locking. It's able to seamlessly integrate with the legacy applications, with the new edge applications as well. You can easily utilize either different clouds, or you can utilize a multi-cloud structure with it. So for suppose, let's say some of your workloads are on Google, some of your workloads on Azure, some of them are on AWS, or some of them are like maybe on-prem. So basically what you can do is you can integrate all of those workloads together and then control them from one singular endpoint, one singular entity, which is the Anthos entity on its own. And then you can also utilize seamlessly be able to integrate all of them together to run Anthos on-prem as well. You can run Anthos on your multi-clouds as well, or you can run Anthos on your Google infrastructure as well. So it's all about not only running your workloads, but at the same time be able to manage and execute and migrate to those workloads as well. So this is a very core architecture. Hunan would actually go in more in depth into this. So this is a very core architecture of how one source VM of Compute Engine is able to migrate towards the Anthos environment. So sorry, not the Anthos. This is the GK cluster environment. So basically, one source VM is actually able to run into the GKE cluster by utilizing that VM into a pod, and that pod is able to run multiple containers inside of it. So in a GKE environment, you have pods, and that pod is able to run multiple containers into it. Each pod is basically utilizing virtual machines, and those virtual machines are basically able to run different containers depending on what size of the pod that you're actually utilizing. So over here, what I would like to request is for Hunan to take over and just show you guys a demo of how we can use Anthos and how we can actually do this migration. Over to you, Hunan, please.
Thank you very much, Sumer. I hope everyone can see my screen okay. All right. So migrate for Anthos. So the very first thing is that migrate for Anthos, while it moves virtual machines to containers, it depends upon three primary components, right? The very first thing is the Migrate for Anthos discovery tool, which is essentially the discovery tool assesses how successful a specific migration is for a given application, and completely gives you a detailed analysis of how likely it is that a specific workload will be able to migrate and modernize and be able to run into a container from a virtual machine. So that's what the Anthos or Migrate discovery tool does. Then we have processing cluster. So processing cluster is a Kubernetes cluster that is going to examine the source VM, and it's going to create the actual migrations. Whereas there is Makectl. So Makectl is just like kubectl. It's a command line tool which is going to communicate and interact with the processing cluster. Migrate for Anthos workflow. So now this is very important. So the very first thing is we're going to enable server's account and all the relevant APIs. We're going to deploy the processing cluster. Then we are going to qualify our workload. We're going to define a specific migration source. Once that is done, we're going to generate and review the migration plan, and then based on that plan, we will review and generate artifacts, which will include all the required files, such as Docker file, such as Kubernetes deployment YAML, and other related artifacts which will be used to finally containerize and deploy that containerized application which was initially running in a VM. So this is the entire workflow which is going to be used in Migrate for Anthos. Before we jump into the demo, I would just like to take a little time and talk about compatible Linux workloads, right? So there are a few workloads which are good, and then there are a few workloads for which we are to be a little bit cautious, right, and which are not recommended. So the recommended workloads are all sorts of application stacks which are basically web application servers, right? Then business logic middleware such as Tomcat. It is recommended to use such applications on and such workloads, such Linux workloads on for migrating from VM to containers. Multi-VM architecture such as an application deployed on LAMP stack, small sized databases like MySQL and Postgres. All these are some very good candidates, right? And based on the operational characteristics, so low duty cycle and bursty workloads which are always on and low load services, and then deployment, testing, and training lab environments. So all these are good candidates. So in short, 90 to 95% of a typical Linux workloads can easily be migrated and modernized through Anthos for Migrate. Now this specific demo is going to focus on Linux workloads, but Migrate for Anthos also has the capability to migrate Windows specific workloads, right? And the things for which we are to be a little bit cautious about is the high performance and large in-memory databases, right? So that is something for which we are to be a little bit cautious about. VMs with special kernel drivers, so for example kernel mode NFS, and then apps with dependencies on specific hardware or software with licenses that are tied to a certain hardware ID registration. So if your application falls into this specific category, then you have to be a little bit cautious about it. Then probably the migration process is not going to be that simple. A few prerequisites. So we are going to create two service accounts for this specific, migration and modernization. So one specific service account is going to have the access to container registry and cloud storage admin role. So essentially, the default storage admin role is going to do the trick. The other one is that we have to enable Compute Engine as a migration source, which will require Compute Engine viewer access and compute storage admin role. We have to enable certain APIs, so service management, service control, cloud resource manager, Compute Engine, Kubernetes Engine, Google Container Registry, Cloud Build. All these APIs, you have to enable it. There's a simple gcloud command as well that we're going to share after this webinar, so that will enable all these APIs. But even if you're using the Google Cloud Console, so if any of these APIs are not enabled, it is simply going to redirect you to those specific APIs which you can then easily enable. All right, so we are going to move for the demo. So what we have is that our right now the application which we are going to migrate and modernize using Anthos Migrate is currently running on this source or virtual machine, and this is our web application. So this is simply an application which is built on top of Django framework, right? And it uses SQLite databases as well, and then there is also a machine learning model which is running in this. So what this application simply does is that it is something for employers and candidates which are looking for jobs. So employer can use this, the HR can use this to publish specific jobs, and then the candidates can go to this specific application and they can apply as a specific cloud applicant. So for example, if I said Hunan, Teba, and then if I write a specific email address, so I can say, okay, I can write demo at example.com, and then if I give a specific cell phone number and experience, let's say I have 7 years of experience, I am a bachelor's, and if I want I can upload my CV. If not, I can simply select my expertise and I submit this, right? We're talking about this specific application. So now I've submitted my job application, and then if I log in as an HR, right? So if I log in as an HR now, and if I see what sort of applicants have applied for this specific job, my backend machine learning model is going to detect that, right? And it's going to give me the best suited applicants for this specific job. So right now, I can see 4 or 5 people have applied for this specific job, and based on that, I can schedule interviews. Long story short, right? So now, obviously, the purpose of this webinar is not to take you through this specific web application features. This is just a test app, right? But the idea is it's a full-fledged monolithic application which is running on my virtual machine, right? And now I'm going to it is running on a virtual machine, and I'm going to use Migrate for Anthos to explicitly migrate and modernize this, right? And the idea is how easy it is to use this specific feature, and containerize this specific workload, and within a few minutes, or within 10 to 15 minutes or 20 minutes, we will be able to fully migrate and modernize this app which was initially running on a virtual machine, and it is going to become compatible enough to run on a managed Kubernetes engine such as GK, right? So what you have to do is you have to go to the Google Cloud Console, right? You have to enable Anthos, and then you can go to migrate to Anthos. The very first step that we have is that we add a processing cluster, right? So adding a processing cluster, it's pretty much simple. It's pretty much straightforward, right? So if I go to adding processing cluster, right, it's going to take me over there. It's going to ask me what sort of workload I want to do. As I mentioned before, you can use Linux workloads, you can use Windows. For this specific demonstration, we are going to focus on Linux workload, right? We're going to choose our cluster. Right now, we don't have a Kubernetes cluster, so let's take out the time and create one, right? So we'll go to create a cluster, and it's going to take us to create that specific cluster. Okay, okay, here we are, and let's call this Anthos Pro because I already created one cluster before this just to test out, things are working. Don't want to screw things up over here. So Anthos Pro webinar, it can be regional, it could be zonal, and then we'll just go to the default node pools, right? Because this is a test environment, so we're going to decrease the number of nodes, right? So Kubernetes Engine, it has the ability you can define the number of nodes, and since it's a managed Kubernetes engine, the master node is going to scale your applications automatically. So this is a test application, I'm restricting it to one, but even if you said that, okay, I want to provision this with 5 nodes, right, and ideally the application is going to run with one node, right, and then as the memory and compute utilization increases, it's going to scale up and scale down automatically. So that's the power of Kubernetes engine, right? And Anthos makes it very easy to migrate your workloads to this specific managed Kubernetes environment. So moving forward with the demonstration, so I'm just going to select an E2 2 core vPCU and 4 GB machine type, right? And that's it. Everything else is going to be default. I'm going to keep things simple for this specific webinar. So back to the clusters, and yes, I think I have added a node pool, I have added metadata, right? Security settings, everything default, right? So yeah, let me just go back to cluster and okay, add a node pool. Node pool is already added. Okay, just give me a second. So yes, it's done. So I created it, right? And I've submitted this. It's going, and it will just take a few minutes to actually, create. While it's creating, I'll just like to talk you through the steps. So the very first step is we create this specific Kubernetes cluster, right? That's the very first step. Then we are going to add this cluster as a processing cluster back in the Anthos, right? So once it's all up and running, we're going to add this as a processing cluster. Once this is added as a processing cluster, then we are going to go and we are going to define a migration plan. We are going to create a migration plan where we're going to add the VM source, and then once that is added, we are going to go and further explore how we can add multiple sources. Once those sources are added, we will go and we are going to perform that specific migration, and it is going to assist and analyze our workload which is running on our virtual machine over here, and then it is going to generate artifacts, right? So we are going to generate artifacts. Those artifacts are going to be utilized, and then using those artifacts, we're going to deploy the specific workloads on our container, right? So we're just going to wait a few minutes, right, and let this specific container get deployed. I think that the cluster is created. Okay, thankfully. Right. So now coming back to Anthos, right, which is the main topic of discussion. So coming back to Anthos, right. So Anthos, what it does is that it's able to, we were going to go to migrate to containers, right? And this is where we will now add our processing cluster, right? So that's the next step that we are going to do. So adding a processing cluster, right? We're going to again select Windows as, Linux as our cluster type, and then we will go and we'll select Anthos Pro Webinar. This is the cluster which we just created, right? And then we have backend bucket name, we have image repo name, right, and we have service account. So we're just gonna go and we're gonna create a new service account. Again, this service account is the same one which we talked about in the presentation. So this will have storage admin access, and what it's going to do is that the processing cluster is going to use this specific service account to deploy images and build and push images to container registry. So which is why we need this specific service account. Then we are going to deploy this. So once it's deploying, it's going to create those service accounts, it's going to enable all the specific and required APIs, and then it's going to install Migrate for Anthos, which is basically used which is an agent, right? So this is something which is going to be installed on GKE, right? And then it's going to configure artifact repository, right? That is also very important. step in this entire process. And then finally, it's going to configure image repository as per requirement for this specific processing cluster. And then it's going to wait for the installation to become healthy, right? So it's just going to take a few minutes, and then once it's done, we're going to be back over here and we're going to look into this, right? Yeah, okay, it's created, right? So Anthos for Migrate webinar is already created, right? So we're going to go back and we are going to is check that our processing cluster is there, it's ready, right? So now the next step is we go in and create a migration plan, right? For migration plan, we are going to require a source, right? So first step is we add a source, right? So we're going to go and we are going to add a migration source. Migration source will require the processing cluster. Okay, so Anthos Pro webinar, that's what we are going to select. Then we are going to define source name and type. So it's going to be let's call it Anthos Pro webinar source, right? And then we have compute engine. So that's going to be the source type. Please remember that right now our source VM resides as compute engine, but we're not just limited to that. We can also, our virtual machine can also be in VMware, it can also be in AWS, it can also be in Azure. There's going to be, one more migration step which happens, which is going to take your workloads from VM and then it's going to bring it to compute engine. But the idea is that the coverage for Anthos or Migrate resides in all these, environments. So it doesn't matter if your virtual machine is running on VM on-prem, it doesn't matter if it's running on AWS, doesn't matter if it's running on Azure, right? So we're going to select that as our source VM, right? And we are going to create new service account. We are going to name that, and this service account is going to have viewer role and storage admin role, right? So we're going to continue with this and add a source, right? So once the source is successfully added, right, it's going to go and we are going to go and we are going to create migration, right? We're going to create a migration plan, and it has already notified us that okay, created migration source, right? So just to revise, we've added processing cluster, we created the relevant service accounts, we've added the source, right? The next step is we go and we add a migration, right? So that's what we are going to do. So we are now going to create a migration. We're going to say okay, Anthos Pro migration, right? Anthos Pro migration, that's going to be our migration name. And we're going to select the source. So it's going to be Anthos Pro webinar source, right? This is the one which we created. Workload type, it's going to be Linux container system. And then, we have to give an instance name. So instance name is basically, if I've written it here, okay, I've not written it here. So let's go back to the VM and let's pick it up from here. It's our Django VM instance, right? So we're going to pick this and we're going to come back. You're going to paste it, right? And then migration intent is we can create image, we can just migrate data or image and data. So for this specific webinar, we're just going to stick with the image, right? And then we're going to go and we're going to create migration, right? So this is like a very important step. Once the migration is created, right, it's going to take a little bit of time. And once the migration is successfully created, we will check whether the migration plan is successful or not. And if it is successful, then we are going to come back and we are going to see and we are going to verify that then we are going to proceed with the next step. And the next step is that we will generate the required artifacts, right? So we're just going to wait a few minutes more, right? Yeah, once this is done, we will generate our artifacts, right? All right, so that started, right? It has started to generate migration plan, and I believe once that is done, we are good to go, and we will we will check for our migration artifacts. So yeah. Just to revise, so we've created the source engine, we've created a one node processing cluster, we've added processing clusters, we've added the source. Now you're going to we've created the migration plan. It's in process. Then you're going to check migration status, right? We're going to review migration status, right? And then we're going to generate artifacts and get artifacts and then deploy the container, right? So yeah, that's pretty much it. So let's just wait, right, while it's getting generated. And once it's done, we are going to look into it again. All right, so it's almost finished generating migration plan. And yeah, 75% running discovery. Now this is also very important, right? So while what's happening right now in the background is that there's a discovery tool, right? So the discovery tool is going to go and it's going to collect all the specific application workload data, right? And then it's going to do an assessment. It's going to analyze how much compatible it is to be deployed into a container, right? And if it once it's 100% completed, if it's error free, right, we're going to check the migration status. And if it's error free, then we are going to assume that it was successful, right? So we're also going to open, in fact, this is already open, right? So let's just connect with our cluster in the meantime as well. So if we are going to connect with this, right, we're gonna go here, we're gonna connect with this specific cluster so that we can easily check what's happening. And it's gonna ask us to authorize. So here we go. Okay, so now this is authorized, and now as soon as our artifact migration plan is generated, okay, so now migration plan is generated, right? What we can do is we can check for our migration status, right? So Makectl, we're going to use this specific command line utility, and we're going to check for its status, right? Just to confirm, how things are. At the end, I am going to write my specific Kubernetes name, right? So that's Anthos. Oh no, sorry, my web migration plan. So that's Anthos migration, pro migration, right? So here we go. And yeah, so it's going to give us an output, and it's going to tell us, okay, what's the progress. So 4x4, it's 100% completed, right? And there has been no issue, right? So that's the status, right? And yeah, we're also going to review this, but I think that's something we've already done. The next step is we generate the artifacts, and then we do the deployment. So okay, so that's the final step. So if I go to this specific migration, right, and if I go towards monitoring, it says generate artifacts. This is the final step, right? Once this artifacts are generated, we will review all these artifacts, right? We'll review the Docker file, we'll review the deployment file. We're going to review other generating deployment files, right? And then generated deployment files. And then once that's okay, if we want to do any sort of specific custom amendments, we can do that. And then we're going to just proceed with the deployment. So it's extracting image. It's going to then upload the image, extracting image out of the source VM, right? That's what it's going to do. Then it's going to upload the image to GCR, right? And then it's going to generate all the deployment files, which we can use kubectl to further, make this specific deployment into our Kubernetes cluster. All right, so hopefully the artifacts are generated. So if I go back to Anthos, we'll see, the entire migration plan was generated and all the artifacts are also generated. And then now we'll go to the command line, and we are going to get those artifacts, right? So we have this command line. We're going to use Makectl, which is the command line tool for Anthos or Migrate, which is going to talk with the processing cluster. We'll come here, and we are going to okay, Makectl, and this is going to say, okay, we don't have my migration plan, no problem. We are going for the specific migration plan, so we'll take its name, and if it comes back, okay, Anthos Pro Migration. So let's pick this name and come back to the online and get its artifacts. So it's going to go and it's going to get all the related artifacts which were generated, right? So now it's saying, okay, it's generated. If I ls, right? So now I can see my deployment file, my Docker file, and my logs file, right? So if I just quickly open the editor and if I just try to view this, right? So quickly let's open the editor and look into these artifacts, right? And we'll just added one of the artifacts, right? Because we want to expose the port 8000, right? So we're going to do that. We're going to include the load balancer and export our target port for port 8000 where our service was initially listening, right? So yeah, if I come to Anthos webinar, right, this is the folder, and okay, I'm not sure why it's taking time today. Maybe the internet is a bit slow here, but anyways. Okay, so this is my deployment file, right? Anthos Migrate, and this is my Docker file, right? So all of this is automatically generated, right, from my source VM, and I am just going to go to my deployment file, and I'm going to edit this, right? So for suppose if I have this specific service, API service 1, right? So I am going to include this specific uh, load balancer, and I'm going to expose my port, right? That's what I'm going to do, and my application is again the Django source VM. So I will come back and I am going to paste this. All right. So just to verify, I am in the Anthos webinar. Yes. Okay, so here I am, and I've exposed this. I've exposed by port 80 as well, and I've also exposed this 8000, and my Django source VM is going to listen to this. So let me just save this. All right, I am going to save this. So I'm going to open the terminal now, and I am going to apply this specific deployment to my Kubernetes cluster. So kubectl apply, right, and deployment.yaml, right? So I'm going to apply this, and it's going to do the deployment. If I want to check what's the status, so I can just write kubectl get pods, and it will show me that, all right, so that's already deployed and it's up and running, right? So I'll come back to my services, right? And if I open my Anthos Pro webinar service, right? So this is the one I've just deployed. So yeah, I can see that my Django service, it's fully containerized, and now it's running on my Kubernetes engine. So yeah, and I think that's pretty much it. Again, you can also log into this, right? And hopefully with the same credentials which were used before. So HR, and if I go and what was the password? This was the password, right? So okay, sign in, and yes, hopefully everything is working. So yeah, I think that is pretty much it, right? So just to summarize, we created a source a compute engine, which was our source VM. We created a node, a Kubernetes cluster with one node, right, which was our processing cluster. Then we added a processing cluster to our Anthos Migrate for containers. We added a source. We created a source. We created a migration plan. We checked and reviewed that specific migration plan. Then we generated artifacts, which were the deployment files and everything which is available here. So deployment file, block list YAML, Docker file, logs, migration YAML, everything. The Anthos or Migrate container, after processing and analyzing our application, it generates these artifacts, it stores it into GCR, and then once we apply deployment, kubectl apply deployment, it's going to go and pick that specific image from GCR and it's going to push that inside our Kubernetes cluster. And right now we can see that this specific Kubernetes cluster, it has this specific service running. So my application, my Django application, which was initially running inside my source VM, right, is now running on a Kubernetes, a managed Kubernetes engine, right? And all of this happened, within a couple of minutes. I did not have to go through the pain of containerizing this application, and yeah, so that is pretty much it. Again, at Royal Sapper, our team specializes in Anthos, right? Migrate for Anthos is just one service which we've talked about today, but there's a lot of other services, like it's service mesh, so it gives you central visibility and control the dashboard of Anthos. Then there's service mesh, which Sumer talked about earlier in the presentation. So service mesh, it helps microservices communicate with each other. Anthos configuration manager, so you can apply various sorts of configurations through your Kubernetes workloads which are running on your on-prem environment or on your Google Cloud or on AWS, so you can do all of that. So a lot about Anthos, right? And today we've only focused on migrating your workloads from virtual machine, whether those virtual machines are on-prem, whether they're on AWS, whether on Azure or on GCP. You can migrate and modernize those workloads and make it compatible enough to run on a managed Kubernetes engine such as GKE, and which gives you the added layer of the central control. It gives you security, it gives you scalability, so on and so forth. So I hope this session was very helpful, right, for every one of us. Again, we're open for questions if there are any, and we'll be happy to answer you those questions. So I'll be unsharing my screen, and over to you, Sumer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nan. Again, we would really, we really appreciate for everyone to be a part of this webinar. And definitely, we're looking forward to hearing some great questions from you and just help you guys out.
So I think I have one question, which is someone asked, can I migrate workloads which are running on EC to AWS? So yes, I think that's what we also showed in the webinar. So you can easily migrate those workloads which are running on EC2. If you want to use migrate for Anthos, then there's a one prerequisite, which is you'll first have to migrate those workloads to Compute Engine instance using migrate for Compute Engine service, and then once they are there in the Compute Engine, Anthos or migrate is going to kick in, and it's going to easily migrate those workloads. So yeah. All right, so we have another question, which is that can I migrate my ASP.NET application, which is running on a Windows server on Anthos? So yes, you can do that, right? You can, in fact, the Migrate for Anthos supports both the operating system. It supports Linux workloads, and it's also supports Windows workloads as well. In this specific webinar, we only focused on Linux workloads, but yes, we also specialize in migrating workloads which are using Windows environment. The only limitation is that the Windows server, the application which is running on the Windows server, it has to be a 2008 R2 or a higher Windows server, right? So applications running on those Windows servers are compatible, and the migrated container is going to run on Windows 2019. And the applications, as far as whether they're built on ASP.NET framework or whether they're built on a .NET framework, their version has to be from 3.5 or higher. So all the ASP.NET version from 3.5 onwards, they're all compatible enough to be modernized and migrated from a VM to Anthos or migrate container. So yeah, hope that answers. Okay, so someone has asked that will migrate for Anthos convert a monolithic application into microservices? All right, so this is a very interesting question. So the Migrate for Anthos is not going to transform let's say a full-fledged application which is monolithic into microservices, right? That's not what Migrate for Anthos is going to do. Obviously, that's a very typical specific work. So that's not I mean, Migrate for Anthos is going to be a part of that process. So for example, if your workloads, either if they're running on containers, right, or even if they're running directly on VMs, the process of deploying or migrating from a monolithic architecture to a microservices architecture is separate. And then Migrate for Anthos comes in the process of containerizing those microservices and making it compatible enough to be migrated and run on a managed Kubernetes engine such as GK. So that's one confusion that I would like to clarify as well. But yes, it will speed up the process of your of your journey from converting your monolithic application into a microservices architecture very swiftly, right? And at Royal Cyber, our DevOps team, they specialize this, right? We study workloads, we understand legacy applications, we take out the feasibility. We also go for a hybrid model approach as well, right? So where we can propose that, okay, some legacy workloads or components or modules which cannot be modernized, they're not compatible to work on containers, they can continue to function on VM. But then other modules which are new modules or which can be containerized, so we help them get containerized, and then we deploy those workloads on a managed engine, Kubernetes engine, like GKE and Anthos. This is where Anthos works in, and it provides you complete visibility and control for all your legacy workloads as well as the workloads which are running on the Kubernetes engine. So yeah.
So we have another question. So how does Anthos differ from migration with Terraform? We can use Terraform scripts to migrate cloud workloads, no? Well, to be honest, yeah, definitely. If you want to go down that path where you can actually create a Terraform script of your current environment and then you can do the migration over there. But the problem in this approach is that in terms of, being cloud to cloud specific is where the actual challenges are, where actually the challenges are, there. So for suppose, let's say if we talk about any managed services specific, artifacts. So let's say Google is using cloud functions, but on AWS you have Lambda. So if you try to create a Terraform script on Google for Google Cloud to actually deploy cloud functions, that needs to be converted in the sense to be able to be used for Lambda itself. Uh, and again, migration from Anthos is a bit different in this context. Here, you're trying to replicate a same environment, or you're trying to use IAC infrastructure as code in order for you to deploy your environment and your workloads. But on Anthos, not on, you're basically trying to not only migrate your workload, but you're also trying to create an environment to execute those workloads and be able to manage those workloads through a single content management system provided by the Anthos service itself. So the overall mindset is a bit different here. You're getting a managed service to help you migrate from point A to point B, but on the Terraform front, you're actually using IAC as your major focus to migrate from point A to point B, which could have a lot of different challenges depending on, since if you're focusing on managed services from one cloud vendor to the other. Hope this answers your question.
Yeah, thanks, Sumer. And there's another interesting question, which is, can you explain Anthos pricing model? So yeah, I think that's interesting. A little bit tricky as well at times. So officially there are two models, right? So there's a pay-as-you-go model and monthly subscription model for Anthos pricing, right? And instead of charging on clusters, it charges you on per CPU, right? So it charges you only $6 per vCPU, right? Virtual compute. And the interesting thing is, if it's based on whatever the Kubernetes configuration is. So if your Kubernetes is running on a 4-core vCPU, then it's going to charge you accordingly, and if it's running on 2 core, then it's going to charge you accordingly, no matter how big the application is, or how many internal parts that it's consuming. So it's not per se Kubernetes or clusters or pods or containers per basis, but it's more of a overall a vCPU of a specific cluster. So $6 is the monthly subscription charges, and but that's like upfront charges, right? So every month $6 is going to get deducted. But if it's a pay as you go model, then that makes up to $8 something. I'm not sure exactly about the exact dollar rate, but there's a pay as you go model for it as well. So yeah.
All right, awesome. So if there are are there any other questions apart from this? Because we're really short on time. And if not, then I think we can close this.
No, Suman, I don't think that's all in the queue. So we're clear. But
Okay,
unless
awesome.
if there are any, yeah, sure.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for everyone to to join us on this webinar. Definitely, you can note down the email address and send us your queries, or if anything, we can definitely help you out with. This was a great experience, talking to all of you and then hearing out these amazing questions. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.